Now there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. This one came to him by night and said to him, Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from God, for no one can do these signs that you do, unless God is with him. Jesus answered and said to him, Verily I say to you, unless one is born anew, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Nicodemus said to him, How can a man be born when he is old? Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Libations and Lectionaries. I'm Reverend Jimmy Gaughan, and I'm joined once again by Reverend Katie Callaway. Aside from my wife, Katie Callaway is our first repeat guest. I guess Ted Wilkinson technically was, but we recorded both of his episodes on the same day back-to-back, so that doesn't count. So, welcome back, Katie.
It's great to be back.
So, let's talk about drinks. It looked like you were drinking a Cigar City Jai Alai.
I am.
That's good stuff.
How perceptive of you.
Well,
yep. We were actually really excited to find this here in Baltimore.
Yeah? Well, yeah, because they're in Tampa, aren't they?
Right.
Yeah.
So we have this little market down the road so all of our beer and wine we have to buy at a special store. So this little store, it was in the local section of our little beer and wine store in our neighborhood. Tampa is not local to Baltimore, but
no, it's not. You have to go a few hours down I-95.
Yeah, not even close. But we were excited to see that. We got it for our Memorial Day cookout in our neighborhood, and
all right.
Had some fun with it.
Interesting.
Yeah. What are you drinking?
I am drinking a beer that I consider to basically be the Holy Grail. It is Founders Brewing Company's Kentucky Breakfast Stout.
Oh, that's a good one.
So just their breakfast stout aged in bourbon barrels. Yeah.
Sounds awesome.
I had my introduction to it was a very interesting afternoon in Winston-Salem 5 years ago with Perry Dixon and Colby Knight at the First Street Draft House drinking KBS.
Perry Dixon was the one who introduced me to that beer as well.
That is not terribly surprising.
No, I don't know how you do it, though. I cannot drink real dark, thick beers in the summertime.
Good air conditioning? Also,
okay,
I kind of went on a mission this month to drink all Kentucky-related drinks since the Kentucky Derby was the first weekend of the month.
Okay.
Mint julep, the last time we talked. Kentucky coffee, which is coffee roasted in Lexington, Kentucky, with bourbon and bourbon cream liqueur in it when Katie and I recorded with Stokes a couple weeks back, and then Kentucky Breakfast Stout today.
Well, that means that I should probably be drinking all Baltimore things since the Preakness was this month.
That is true, which Justify won both races.
Right.
We'll have to see.
Although, did you see some of the footage from the Preakness infield?
No.
It was Baltimore at its finest. College students belly flopping in the mud, and you need to do yourself a favor and go back and find our local news broadcast of the infield.
Okay.
It was entertaining.
So what you're telling me is that the only difference between the infield at the Preakness and the infield at a NASCAR race is horses versus cars?
Yeah, I mean, yes. And the people, what was most interesting, it was all college students filling the infield.
Sure.
Obviously, because it's the cheap ticket. So, I mean, think about the colleges that are around here. So it'd be Hopkins and Towson and UMBC. So, like, fairly intelligent people doing unintelligent things in the infield.
Not that we ever did anything unintelligent at Wake Div.
I mean, no, yes. Judgment is being cast there, but I'm just saying it was quite interesting for me to look at.
Sure. Oh, I believe it. Yeah, I was actually, interestingly, just reading an article today about the infield at the Indy 500, which the writer compared to being in one of the circles of hell. So,
I believe it.
Yeah.
They had mud up to their knees.
Yeah, I mean, y'all have been getting a little bit of rain lately.
Yeah, we had some crazy floods yesterday, or I guess it was 2 days ago.
Yeah, in Ellicott City.
Yeah, and a lot of Baltimore flooded as well. So it was crazy. People started texting me. I was at church. People started texting me like all night, and they were like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I was like, "Do you know something I don't know? Did a shooting happen? Did something happen?" But then I saw that it was on CNN's like main headline on their website was the Ellicott City flood.
Right.
So we've got some friends that live in Catonsville, which is about 5 miles from Ellicott City, and Catonsville actually got more rain.
Okay.
They got like 4 more inches of rain, and so our friend's basement had about 6 to 8 inches of water in it, and so we helped them rip up some carpet yesterday, and became good friends with a wet dry vac.
Yeah.
It was a lot of.
Yeah. No. So, my Uncle Bill, who is literally a rocket scientist who went to Johns Hopkins, and a Marine. It's an interesting combination there. He lives in Pasadena, Maryland, outside of Baltimore, and he posted a terrain map yesterday that basically shows that all the water runs downhill into Ellicott City.
Yeah, and downtown Ellicott City is a big hill.
Yeah. So.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy time. We haven't had the courage to go look in our basement yet.
Has your sump pump been running?
What?
Do you have a sump pump, and has it been running?
It's debatable.
Okay.
It's one of those things that was broken on and off throughout the summer or throughout the winter.
Right.
And we just haven't had the courage to go downstairs. And in fact, we were talking to our neighbor yesterday, and it made me feel a little bit better because we said, "Have you gone to your basement?" And he said, "Nope, I'm afraid to." So we're not alone.
Do you have anything important in the basement?
I don't think so. Christmas decorations. But
Those can be replaced.
Yeah. Yep. My backpacking stuff.
That's pretty expensive stuff, unfortunately. But, you know, it's also designed to get wet and muddy, so.
Yeah. I'm just trusting that everything's going to be okay.
Well, the main floor of your house still appears to be dry, and your lights are on, so bonus.
Everything is good, yeah. Yeah.
Well, yay. You didn't happen to see an ark on Sunday, did you?
Oh, the ark? No. I heard that it's in Kentucky for good. The ark part.
Yeah, that particular ark. What a scam that was perpetrated on northern Kentucky. It's insane. And the thing that gets me about it is Ken Ham was like, "Oh, we built this to biblical specifications," and it's like, "Oh, really? Did that include the biblical rebar you used for its structure and the biblical air conditioning and lights that you have inside of it?" Yeah. So
I don't say, like, why don't you use some archaeology to help you with your building specs?
Right.
Oh, wait, there's nothing.
Yeah. Whoops. Yeah. So every time, when I was at the church in Lexington, every time I would take my high school and middle school youth to Cincinnati to go to the Kings Island theme park, some of my high schoolers who were by and large liberal troublemakers, they would be like, "Can we go to the Ark Encounter?" And I'd be like, "No, because you would get us all arrested."
Oh, goodness.
So, yeah,
I would like to go there one time. Just once.
That would be the only time you'd be allowed to go there because you'd probably get kicked out and banned.
Yeah. Also, I feel like you need to do a show on the Ark narrative.
I can do that.
And why it is always the go-to story for children.
Yeah, this story that's supposedly about basically genocide. Why do we go to that with kids?
Yeah. It's the happy-go-lucky kid's story.
Yeah. I mean, there's a song that I have woken up to pretty much every morning I have ever been at church camp about genocide.
Right.
Because that would be an interesting one to explore.
A little bit of genocide.
That'd be an interesting one to explore. That was one of the texts that I had to preach on in homiletics class. And, yeah. And I approached it actually from an environmental justice point of view, and Dr. Miles did not appreciate that.
Yikes.
Whoops.
Oh, man.
It was 5 years ago, so I don't really care anymore.
Right.
Anyway. So, you preached on John 3 on Sunday.
I did. I tried.
You tried?
I tried.
Okay. Well, it's an interesting... So, I don't think I've ever preached on that text outside of Lent.
Interesting.
Certainly never on Trinity Sunday, even though it's a logical text for Trinity Sunday, when, in the most basic and, unfortunately, the first terms that are coming to mind are fairly patriarchal and dated, but the most basic terms you put it in, Jesus talks to Nicodemus about having come from the Father and how to be saved you must be reborn of the Spirit and the water. I mean, you get all three persons of the Trinity in this text.
Right. So when I first read this text, over a month ago for this sermon.
Right, because you had to write your sermon well in advance, didn't you?
Yeah, yes. I wrote it a month ago.
Good times.
Which was nice, but some things happened between when I wrote it and when I preached it. So that's always a tricky thing of, like, how much new stuff do you put in?
Right.
Because our country is crazy and our world is crazy.
Yep.
And how do you talk about relationships when, and God being relational when there's all kinds of stuff going down, school shootings and,
yeah, because the Santa Fe High School shooting, when was that, a week and a half ago?
Yeah. And then the Palestinian-Israeli conflict kind of ramping up again. And yeah, so that was one of those things that I didn't know what to do with it. But when I first read this text, it was interesting because I thought, I'm not even going to use this. I thought, I'm just going to use last year's Trinity text, which was the Jesus baptism story. Okay. And then I heard that I preached on that the first Sunday of Lent, because this year that came up during Lent rather than on Trinity Sunday. So I realized I couldn't do that. Right. And then I was stuck in this weird place of like, well, I guess I'm going to have to do the hard work of like totally reframing this very familiar story. Because people's understandings of it are so clouded by John 3:16.
Sure.
In fact, I would be willing to bet that if you would have asked people in kind of our world, not necessarily pastors who like do this stuff for a living, but like faithful people, if you were to ask one like, all right, what story does the John 3:16 verse come out of? Right. I would not have been able to name Nicodemus.
Sure.
So I think that I had this sense of the story of Nicodemus and this idea of being born again, kind of being lost as verse 16 was co-opted and turned into kind of the basis of kind of the high pressure decision based Christianity. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a beautiful narrative that doesn't need to be lost and that can be reclaimed for kind of a more progressive approach using the Trinity.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, the backstory to this particular narrative, you have this representative of, quite frankly, the conservative Jewish population coming to Jesus and saying, as far as I'm concerned, you are a teacher who has been anointed by God. Now, obviously, that position wasn't real popular with some of the people he worked with, thus why he came by night.
Right, and that's what's so interesting about it. He came by night, and basically, I kind of read this as like, he came and he recognized that, yes, Jesus kind of is acting more like God than anyone he'd ever met before, and anybody he'd ever encountered. And somehow he had to try to reconcile that with his monotheism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if it's interesting to think about the Jewish traditions of the Messiah is not God. The Messiah is their cultural, political, national savior. And here you have Jesus, whose claim is to be both.
Right.
Which, yeah, it absolutely flies in the face of the Jewish faith saying there is one God and no God but Yahweh.
Right. Right. And so here comes this guy who is embodying just a completely different way. And I think Nicodemus picks up on that.
Sure.
And what I find most interesting about this is kind of the last 2,000 years. So this encounter happens, but what comes out of this encounter is not anything beautiful about the Trinity. What comes out of this encounter is, for God so loved the world, right?
Right.
And you've got to pray the prayer. Otherwise, you're not getting into eternity. You're not getting into paradise.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you're just taking little sound bites from that passage too, we only usually deal with verse 16. We don't worry about the verse after it where it says God did not send God's Son into the world to condemn the world. No, we're not going to worry about that part.
Right. Yeah. And so somehow this God sending this Son turned into rather than like saving the world, rather than an embrace of the world, it turned into kind of a condemnation of the world. Mm-hmm. And this faith perspective, I think, is part of the reason why people have been walking out of the church so much.
Oh, yeah. It's centuries of proof texting one verse.
Right, right. And it all makes sense initially. Yeah, for God so loved the world that God sent God's only Son. Like, this makes sense initially.
Yeah.
Until you have a faith crisis that calls for a deeper experience of God. Or until you have doubts or questions that go beyond the reach of that verse.
Right.
And so I have this, I was thinking about this text, and I was thinking about this problem of kind of the cultural Christianity that is so prevalent in the South, but also just kind of wherever Christians have had a large impact, that understands this verse as you've got to make a decision for faith. And if you don't, no decision is just as bad. Yeah. Because that means you're headed toward hell. I think that this is this message that's so focused on, and it ends up being focused on crucifixion and forgiveness of sins and heaven or hell, that kind of thing. This message leads people to ask the question, is this it? Mm-hmm. When we get into a faith crisis. And so it made me think about, there was this night, and so I'm going to talk about Bentley for a minute, because today is the 1-year anniversary of his death, and I feel like I have to.
Well, he was a good dog. Of course you have to.
Yeah, he was awesome. And I am fully in under the assumption that he is still with us. And I have a feeling that Sophie and Bentley have so many similar qualities. It's scary. But anyway, so there was this one night, shortly after John and I got married, that we were in our house in Greenville, South Carolina, and Bentley, you knew Bentley. He was not the most graceful dog, and not the most coordinated dog.
No, honestly, Albus reminds me a great deal of Bentley, not just because they're both black labs, but because Albus will run full tilt into a wall.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that was Bentley. So there was this one night where we let him out into the backyard, and our neighbor had this white cat that had been taunting him on our back fence for a long time. You see where it's going, right?
Yes.
So the cat jumped into the yard because the cat was like, Bentley's not a threat. And he ended up catching it and coming to the door with this look on his face, like, is this it? And so he ended up dropping the cat and then catching it for a second time, coming to the door again to show us his bounty, and then letting it go. But both times he came to the door, he had this look on his face that was like, guys, is this it? Like, this is unsatisfying. And I think that, like, thinking about that response, thinking about how he dropped the cat and then picked it up again, we have turned I don't think progressive Christianity has done this, but I think kind of cultural Christianity has done this, and the more conservative strains of Christianity have done this, turned faith into this chase. And then you catch it, and slowly it becomes unsatisfying.
Sure.
And there's an answer for that. And this unsatisfaction, this dissatisfaction, I guess, comes, I think, because of verse 16 in this text.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like you do have that part. Okay, great. So God so loved the world, whoever believes in him. Great. What's next? You know,
right.
Like Bentley with the cat. What happens now?
Right. And I think our Baptist history professor talked about this a good bit. Bill,
would that be the fabulous Billy J. Leonard?
That would be Bill Leonard, yeah. He talked about quite often the Jesus vaccine. And how, like, you just think we just need a Jesus vaccine. Pray the prayer.
Right.
You're set. And there's no change in lifestyle. And so I think the beauty of progressive Christianity says, no, that's not it. It's a lifestyle. It's a complete transformation of individual and community.
Right. Well, and interestingly, like, if you think about it, that's what the Epistle of James is all about.
Right.
Which is why I don't understand why Martin Luther despised that book so much, because it fit right in with his ethos.
That's an interesting perspective. I'm wondering if he would not have been so adamant about despising James if the Lutheran Reformation hadn't caught on quite so strongly.
Sure. Well, and it might have had something to do with his whole anti-Semitism thing too, but that's a different story for a different day. Yeah. So here's where I'm going with the question of Bentley's faith, saying, "Is this it?" I think that the Trinity. First, I think the Trinity has been kind of resurfaced and grown in importance in progressive circles. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've noticed that, but I do think that. And I have to say, it's been a bit of a growing pain for the disciples, because historically for us, a lot of disciples' teaching over the last 200 years has looked at the Trinity as being almost heretical, because there's not a lot of scriptural support for it. And basically the way Alexander Campbell and Barton Stone looked at things was, if it's not in the Bible, it's not our belief.
Okay.
So the Trinity has been a very hard thing for a lot of especially older traditional disciples to justify, but we're coming around.
Yeah. Well, the Pope of Progressive Christianity, Richard Rohr, wrote a book on it, so now we all have to adopt the Trinity, right?
I have never heard him referred to as the Pope of Progressive Christianity.
But it fits, right?
It does. I mean, given that he's a Catholic and he lives in a commune in New Mexico, I mean, it's pretty apt.
But I guess I can't say that anymore since Francis is turning out to be more progressive than most. But
he is. He's still got some very traditional Christian belief or Catholic beliefs, which I assume comes with being a Jesuit.
Right.
So.
And Pope.
Right.
So my thought is that the Trinity, especially recently, has kind of been reawakened. I guess had a reawakening and then kind of an uncovering in progressive circles to bring depth into our world and into our spirituality. And so I think the Trinity can respond to the question, is this it? With a resounding no. This is not it. There is so much more. God is so much bigger and so much more complex and mysterious than just a dude who sends his son to die because dude's got some weird justice issues going on, right?
Right. Well, and yeah, if you read 8 chapters later in John, 7 chapters, John 10, said dude who's been sent talks about how there is another one who will come to take his place. There's more to the story.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Trying to look back at this text. So, the being born from above, I think, deserves some conversation.
Okay.
Obviously, that's not the most well-known phrase or translation of that passage is being born again, right?
Right. But in the academic translations of it, Jesus says, you must be born from above of water and the Spirit.
Yeah. Have you, is being born again a big thing in disciples? Do you use that language a lot?
It is about as easy to say that the disciples use one thing as it is to say the Baptists use one thing.
Okay.
Congregational polity, it is different from congregation to congregation. I would say that the disciples I hang out with the most aren't so concerned about the born again part of it as the idea of renewing oneself.
Okay, yeah.
So
yeah, that makes sense. I think the being born again, especially in congregations that practice believers' baptism.
Mm-hmm. Which every disciples congregation that I know of does. So.
Right. So that's why I asked. I think being born again, from my experience, has been something that is a more common phrase in a church that practices believers' baptism than other places. And so I have this thought that being born again or born from above, whatever, I think it's the same word.
Sure.
It's just a different translation of the same word. I think that I was thinking about, obviously, like, my whole worldview has shifted and turned upside down since having Sophie. And I think that took on a different significance for me. That being born again means becoming dependent again.
Okay.
Means, like, think about, like, who taught you to talk and to walk?
Sure.
And I think I'm wondering if Jesus here is more so telling Nicodemus that, look, Nicodemus, like, you've become way too self-sufficient. and the community of God, this new kingdom, whatever you want to call it, is going to be set on community, because God is defined by community.
Okay.
And so my thought is that being born again or born from above is Jesus's admonition to become reliant again, to become dependent on others again.
Okay. Maybe to unlearn everything you have learned and go back to the basics.
Yeah, and think about, so I made a mistake the first time I preached this sermon. Somehow I'd read my sermon 10 or 12 times and edited and done all kinds of crazy stuff to it. And somehow I got it in my manuscript that Nicodemus was a Pharisee. I mean, not a Pharisee, a tax collector.
No, that's Matthew.
Yes. I know. So Nicodemus here is a Pharisee.
Right.
And I preached the first service and called him a tax collector, and somebody in our church came up to me and corrected me, which I was appreciative of.
Sure. I mean, I think given the context we're given for the Pharisees, it might be fair to say he was a spiritual tax collector.
Right, yeah, there you go. But I do think that there's something too, Pharisees didn't necessarily have to become dependent on anybody.
Sure.
They were dependent on their own knowledge of the law and of tradition, and were the enforcers of that, right?
Yeah.
So Nicodemus kind of came up in a system that taught self-sufficiency and independence and individualism, that did not teach community.
Right.
So I do think there's something to being born again or being born of the Spirit. I mean, think about Augustine talked about the Trinity as the lover, beloved, and the one who binds. So the Spirit is that which binds us together. So being born of the Spirit is to be bound to another, to be in community with another.
Okay.
And I think that's really beautiful to think about. God in community with God's self created us in that image, that we are living into the image of God insofar as we are in community with others.
Sure. Well, and I mean, if you think about Genesis 2, going back way to the beginning, even if we just look at the creation story as a mythological representation of what happened scientifically, the fact of the matter is God created two human beings, and God said, let us create them in our image.
Right.
I mean, it's very specific. Every translation I have ever read, God says, oh, hello, Lily.
Lily.
This moment brought to you by an overprotective German Shepherd. Every translation I've ever read of the creation story, God talks about creating mankind in our image. And then God sets about, creates Adam, says it is not good for the man to be alone, creates another. So automatically you have this communal idea of God creating multiple people to live in community with one another. And then you fast forward to John 3, fast forward in the biblical narrative several thousand years, in scientific narrative several billion years.
Right.
You're looking still at what you're saying about this idea of unlearning your self-reliance and relying on community in order to be born from above.
Right. And I just thought about this, Jimmy, that in many ways, so I've been thinking all day about our conversation, and I've been thinking about, why does Trinity Sunday come after Pentecost? Other than Pentecost, obviously we celebrate the Spirit, and now we've got 3, and what the heck do we do with this? So we talk about Trinity.
Right.
But I do think there's something to the Pentecost story preparing us to live in community with one another.
Okay.
So the Trinity follows this story of the miracle of understanding and the miracle of communication coming, and we wouldn't be able to have community without understanding and communication, right?
Right.
So I think the Trinity and Trinity Sunday and a celebration of community in God, I think that's the logical next step from Pentecost.
Sure. And that really makes a lot of sense because, you think about that Pentecost narrative, it specifically says faithful Jews from all parts of the world who are in Jerusalem celebrating the Jewish festival of Pentecost. And they can all understand what the apostles are saying. This is the apostles building an international community without even trying.
Right. So the community building starts, obviously with Pentecost, but it's almost as if completion can occur because God is a God defined by community.
Sure.
Not that any of our communities have reached completion of any kind, but I do think that that's certainly something to seek out.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so I know that you and John couldn't be at Katie and my wedding because you were, I think, moving.
Yeah.
If I recall correctly, moving to Atlanta. But so Michelle Voss Roberts did the blessing prayer for the dinner, and she referred to the people gathered as the blessed community, referred to it as the eschatological feast. Because it was a gathering of people that you would not see under any other circumstances, which if, I was at your wedding and thinking back to the reception, it was a gathering of people who would not be together under any other circumstances. But in that moment, they all came together and formed a community because of one purpose. And I think that translates well beyond weddings. It translates to Sunday morning in the congregation. It translates to every time people of faith gather together, whether or not they're all of the same faith. They are gathered together for a common purpose, such as your Moral Mondays or your Red for Ed or your Poor People's Campaign. That is all the kind of community that you are describing with the birth from above of the Spirit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. And wouldn't you rather be a part of a community that is diverse and is representative of the unifying work of the Spirit of God than a community that is, by and large, monolithic?
Oh, absolutely. Because if a community was made up of everybody like me, that would be the most boring shit I've ever encountered.
Same. Yeah. I don't think a community could be made up of people like me. I feel like that would be a recipe for disaster.
I can just imagine the flag football games.
Yeah. Oh, Lord.
There might be comments about the NCAA.
Yes. I don't know what you're talking about.
No, but some of the people listening will, and that's the beautiful thing about podcasts.
That's right. The NCAA tournament is a wonderful thing that happens every year in March for basketball.
If I'm not mistaken, actually, the NCAA World Series are going on right now.
The softball World Series is.
Yes.
Baseball hasn't quite started yet.
Right. Anyway.
Yep.
So that was an interesting aside. So back to the diverse community.
Well, yeah. So I think that Bishop Desmond Tutu has something to say about this and about the importance of community with the Ubuntu philosophy of I am because we are. And so I think there's something to be said about the centrality of relationships in the human experience. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what the Trinity speaks to.
Sure.
In our spiritual lives, I guess.
That makes sense. And speaking of things like that, I know you watched the royal wedding. I know you watched
Of
the
course
royal
I
wedding.
did.
So thinking about Bishop Michael Curry's sermon,
Yeah.
it was about the power of love.
Mm-hmm.
Which, honestly, I mean, I watched the whole 13 minutes in all sincerity. It was a beautiful sermon, but the whole time I had Huey Lewis and the News playing in my head.
Yeah.
But if you think about, his entire conceit was on the redemptive power of love. You can love yourself, but it's going to be completely unfulfilling and unsatisfying.
Right.
In order to properly have love, you need community.
Right.
And, I can't help but think that's part of what Jesus was trying to impart to Nicodemus here, especially taking into account everybody's favorite verse, John 3:16, for God so loved the world. God didn't love God's self. God loved all of God's creation.
Right. And so what does God do for that, for the world?
Right.
The second person of the Trinity then becomes incarnate in this world. And so there are multiple objects of love now. So the world loves the Son, and the Son loves the world. And both, dare I say both are redeemed because of it.
Sure. I mean, you think about Jesus was one man. Yes. We look at him as being the representation of incarnate God, as being Sophia made flesh, if you will.
Yeah.
But he was still flesh. He was still representative of mankind. And if we accept...
Humankind.
My bad, humankind. Look, I've had half of a 12.3% ABV, 22-ounce beer here. Give me a break.
I let it slide the first time, Jimmy.
Yeah. If we accept St. Augustine's ideal of the flesh being inherently sinful, which I'm still not sure about that, but let's, for the sake of argument, say that it's a thing. We're talking about God incarnate being born into an inherently sinful body. So yes, I think there is some merit to the idea of the redemption of the Christ.
Yeah, well, yeah. Jesus was baptized, wasn't he?
He was indeed. And John said, I am not fit to untie your sandals. And Jesus said, but this is what needs to be done.
Right. Yeah. John was baptizing for what reason, though?
John was baptizing a brood of vipers.
For the forgiveness of sin.
That's
and
right.
The repentance of whatever. So that's always the question that I get when I'm teaching that passage to the youth. Wait, Jesus was baptized?
Yeah.
For the forgiveness of sin?
Yep.
A second. You can see the hamster wheels start to turn in their heads.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I think we talked about this last time, but that, again, is why I love Lamb, the Gospel According to Biff, so much, because it presents Jesus as a human teenager and young adult.
Right.
Those lost years. It doesn't prop him up as some holier-than-thou asshole who just rolled up on the Pharisees and said, here's what's what at the age of 18. No.
With perfectly coiffed hair.
Yeah, it didn't happen. Also, Jesus didn't have blonde hair, or blue eyes. White American Jesus is a lie, people.
Yes. Yes. Oh, man. So, have you read Richard Rohr's book on the Trinity?
I've read bits and pieces of it. I have not read it all the way through. I have, with regard to Richard Rohr, I've focused more on his Enneagram work than his stuff on the Trinity.
His Enneagram book is incredible. His book on the Trinity is called The Divine Dance.
Okay.
And I feel like I can't think about the Trinity without that image in my head. About the three dancing in this dynamic, never-ending circle. By the way, my computer is on a TV tray right now, and Lily just bit the TV tray and lifted it up, almost turned over the computer and everything.
I wondered what was going on. I heard her whining.
Yep, that was that. I won't let her take the TV tray.
She's a good puppy, but how old is she at this point? Like 1?
Yeah, she's a little over 1.
Yeah.
She's currently trying to eat our rug now.
And German Shepherds are puppies till they're like 6.
Yeah.
And then they become old dogs.
Right. They don't have a middle. So I think that there's something to this perichoresis, this divine dance. Mm-hmm. And I did do a little bit of research, and I'll also give the same precursor to what I said last time. I'm not a Greek scholar. I just enough Greek to make me get me in trouble, not enough to get me out of trouble.
Jim Powell, if you're listening, we're sorry.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that just gives me anxiety thinking about it. But what is interesting is the word used for eternal in verse 16 is ionos, which doesn't mean heaven, which is how it's often interpreted, right? So,
sure.
Sorry, Lily is eating my shoestring right now.
Do we need to take a break so you can control your dog?
She's fine.
Okay.
All is fine. So the word used here is ionos, which does not mean another place that we go after we die, and it doesn't even mean another time. Ionos, I found it really interesting, is a circular term. It has no beginning and no end.
Okay.
Which goes so beautifully with the idea of perichoresis.
Sure.
Of this circle dance. So, what if Jesus was inviting Nicodemus to dance? What if he was inviting him to this idea of God being this circular experience that is all around us?
Okay.
I mean, obviously Jesus didn't have thousands of years of Trinitarian theology just like preemptively in his head.
I think Jesus was probably better off for that.
Yeah. But I love this idea of ionos kind of giving you a glimpse into this this dance that we're invited to be a part of.
Okay.
Yeah. So, we're still fighting.
This is why the doors on either side of my office are shut and Albus is on the other side of them.
Yeah. If only row homes had doors everywhere.
Yeah. No, I mean, my house is probably just about as old as yours, except it's built on an eighth of an acre as opposed to being a row house.
Yeah. And I think if Lily was closed off in a room by herself,
we would know her puppy mind.
Yeah. Literally, like, game over.
Well, I'm the one who's closed off in a room by myself. Albus is out there with Katie making dinner, so.
That's awesome. Here she is.
He's a good puppy. Yes,
no,
you
not
are.
A good puppy. Anyway, so that's really all I've got. I love the idea of this dance. And so I invited the congregation. Gosh, it's so dance is almost a 4-letter word in Baptist life.
Well, I mean, you've heard the joke about why Baptists don't like sex, right?
Because it could lead to dancing.
It could lead to dancing, yeah.
Yeah. So my my benediction and the ending of my sermon was, all right, are you ready to dance? And so I said a 4-letter word, even though dance has 5 letters, but I love this idea of dancing with this God who invites us to be a part of the Godhead and invites us to be a dynamic part of the community. I think that's a really powerful image.
Sure.
Even though I can't personally dance myself.
Well, dancing is in the eye of the beholder, right?
Yeah. There's a children's book that I read to Sophie last night called Giraffes. It's like Giraffes Can Dance or something like that. And it's about this giraffe named Gerald who there is every year somewhere in Africa there's this big jungle dance where all the jungle animals come out to dance. And the giraffe never is able to dance and he gets made fun of. And then he goes off on his own, and the cricket gives him a little pep talk, and the moon plays a tune, and Gerald the giraffe can finally dance, and all the jungle animals come and see Gerald dance, and it's a beautiful thing. And I think that so often I see myself as Gerald. But that's the Trinity, right?
Sure.
So we are invited to dance even if we can't.
Sure. And it's funny, since you mentioned Nicodemus being invited to dance, I've been thinking about how he came in the middle of the night, and now I have both Bruce Springsteen's Dancing in the Dark and the song Dancing in the Moonlight stuck in my head.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. You gotta put that one on the podcast.
Of course I will. But, because, I mean, the good thing about Nicodemus coming at night is that nobody else can see him. But that's also the downfall, is that he's not in community when nobody else can see him.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Or maybe he just didn't want someone to see him dance.
Maybe not.
We played at the end of our fusion service, so that's our service that John does music for. Mm-hmm. At the end of the fusion service, the band played I Want to Dance with Somebody. It was a lot of fun.
It sounds like it.
Yeah, it was great.
Well, and, thinking about the lyrics of that song, I want to dance with somebody who loves me. I mean,
right.
There's your invitation right there.
Right. And I want to feel the heat. And I know that she didn't mean it like this, but it feels very appropriate the week after Pentecost. I want to feel the heat with somebody.
Yeah, I guarantee you that's not what she meant, but you're right.
Right.
Lily has an opinion too, I think.
I don't know how much more of this Lily can handle.
Well, that's okay, because I think we've just said just about everything there is to be said, and we're at 53 minutes. So
nice.
Yeah. So that's the story of Nicodemus coming to Jesus at night in a nutshell.
In a nutshell. In a 53-minute nutshell.
It's a big nutshell.
Yep.
Well, so what's next for you in terms of preaching?
I am not preaching for a while. I've done 2 in a row now. So basically, John and we trade off in between sermon series.
Okay.
And I dibsed Trinity Sunday before the preaching calendar came out. So I ended up preaching 2 in a row.
Interesting that you called dibs on it, because Katie Smith, my wife, also preached on Sunday, and her opening paragraph was like, most preachers dread Trinity Sunday.
Right.
So.
Well, here's the thing. So when we were at Wake, I could have cared less for the Trinity as a theological concept and as like an addition to my spiritual life. I just don't think I was there. I had just kind of confronted the father language in my mind, and I just couldn't deal with Trinity on top of that. Mm-hmm. And so then when I went to Emory for the degree I did there, I did some pretty significant work with some Trinity stuff.
Okay.
And that's where I kind of fell in love with it. And so since I've called dibs on Trinity Sunday a couple of times to preach on Trinity Sunday.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's fair to say that at Wake, we were being reborn into community, weren't we?
Right. So we were living it, yeah. And I just hadn't kind of caught the vision or the language for that yet.
Yeah. We were learning to walk and talk again.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I just hadn't gotten to the calculus part of the walking and talking, right?
Indeed. Well, calculus is an AP course for a reason.
That's right. Yeah. Trinity is to theology what calculus is to mathematics.
That sounds about right. As somebody who took AP calculus, that really sounds right.
Yeah.
So, above and beyond the Trinity, is there anything out there in the world, either religious or secular, that you're really enjoying right now?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. I love my personal time I spend going to the gym. That's predictable for me, but that's like my go-to. And I've recently rediscovered swimming, which I am terrible at right now.
Okay.
And so it is a labor of love, whereas like I've always thought that I've got pretty strong legs. I can kind of go out there and grind out a run, or a bike ride or something like that. Mm-hmm. But like I got in the pool for the first time the other day to swim some laps, just thinking this would be a great idea. And, dang, it was tough. So I'm finding a lot of joy in challenging myself with swimming right now.
Well, that sounds great.
What about you?
Well, I go to the gym pretty much every day, and I hate it. You know, I do it to stay in good shape, and I do it because the Navy's paying for my membership to the YMCA. But I tell you what, I've got this program that's increasing the number of push-ups I can do, and I did 250 push-ups in sets this morning, and I spent most of the day hating myself. So,
oh yeah, that sounds terrible.
God bless you for wanting to embrace the self-improvement, but it can suck.
Yeah, it's where I...
See, Lily agrees with me.
Yeah. So a skateboarder just went down our street. Lily abhors skateboards.
Well,
it's hilarious.
You know.
Like, loses all of everything when she sees a skateboard. It's really embarrassing when we're out in public, but it's funny when we're out.
Anyway, as far as the things that I'm enjoying outside of my little bubble, I don't know. There's a new season of Arrested Development that came out today. Haven't watched any of it yet. I get to go to Wild Goose and be a volunteer ranger in a month and a half, so that should be interesting.
I'm really jealous about that. John and I are kind of at a loss about what to watch now that all of our shows are on summer break.
I hear that. Yeah.
You're big Madam Secretary fans, and
that show's just about done, isn't it?
What?
I think they have like one season left, and then it's done.
I mean, don't even start.
Or wait, no, I'm sorry. I'm thinking Veep, not Madam Secretary.
Oh, thank goodness.
My bad.
Okay, I was about to get really sad, Jimmy. No, so I'm like emotionally attached to the secretary. And then we watch Designated Survivor. And even though we can't stay up late enough on Saturday nights anymore to watch Saturday Night Live, we watch it on Mondays during lunch.
That's what Hulu was made for, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, Katie and I tried to get into Designated Survivor, and the first few episodes were interesting, but then it just became like 24 President Edition.
Yeah, there are a lot of different storylines. I have trouble following it. Most of the time I sleep through the second part of it, but I still find the first part of each episode really interesting. Sure.
I tell you what, there's been a bunch of stuff on Netflix, especially that I've enjoyed lately. Season 2 of Dear White People was quite enjoyable. Yeah, it was ironically, but
I didn't know what I was getting into watching Dear White People. I knew that it was a show that I needed to watch just because of the social commentary and all of that.
Sure.
Last summer when I was painfully pregnant, the only way that I could enjoyably exercise was to ride my bike on the trainer in my living room. And so I would turn on Netflix really loud because the trainer is really loud. So I did not know that there were so many sex scenes in Dear White People.
Oh yeah, there's lots of sex and nudity in Dear White People.
I had it up so loud, our neighbors were like, "What is happening over there?" It was very interesting.
Yeah, I can see that being awkward.
Yeah, but that might need to get edited out.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it is a good show.
It is a great show.
It calls up a lot of issues with especially white privilege, but also male privilege and straight privilege.
Yeah.
And it, yes, it's called Dear White People. It's about the dynamics of what happens when you're a black person living in a white person's world, but it goes so much deeper than just that.
Yeah, it's really a great show.
Yeah.
And shows we'll bring it back around to Trinity.
Okay.
It shows the intricacies of communal living.
Yeah.
And the beautiful things about it and the really difficult things about communal living.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out how to do this thing we call life together.
Yes, indeed. Well, I think that's a pretty good place to wrap it up.
All right. This was fun.
Yeah. So, I'm sure we'll have you on again. I just don't know when. I know that the next episode, my guest will be the Reverend Jen Fredette, fellow alumnus of Wake Forest University School of Divinity and a licensed pastoral counselor in Alexandria, Virginia. And we will be discussing... I don't remember what text we're discussing. I just remember it's from the book of Genesis. So that should be interesting.
All right.
Anyway, until next time, this has been Libations and Lectionaries. Have a libation and read the Bible. Libations and Lectionaries is recorded and edited using Audacity open source audio software. The theme song is Funk and Percussion, used under the Creative Commons license from hooksounds.com. Thank you for listening. We'll see you again in 2 weeks.